Hello and welcome everyone to our literary program today. My name is Isabel Rosenthal and I'm the Public Programs Associate at the Skirball Cultural Center in Los Angeles. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, we are a museum and cultural center deeply inspired by the American democratic ideals of freedom, justice, and equality, and we are guided by the Jewish tradition of welcoming all. Our hope is that our work offers opportunities for cross-cultural connections and for building community. We are thrilled to co-present this program today on David Grossman's book, More Than I Love My Life, with our esteemed literary partner, Andrea Grossman of Writer's Block. Writer's Block has been enriching our intellectual lives for over 25 years now by amplifying important contemporary authors, books, and thought leaders, and by enhancing the general public's awareness and access to significant literary and cultural work, and really reminding us all of the importance of literature and the written word as an art form. Thank you, Writer's Block, for all that you do. On that note, I will pass the virtual stage over to Andrea now, who will introduce our panelists today, David Grossman, tuning in from Israel, and David Ulin, here with us in Los Angeles. Thanks everyone for being here. We hope that you enjoy the conversation, and please look out for the link to purchase the book, which we'll provide in the Q&A function during the program. Over to Andrea now. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Isabel. And hello, and thank you all for being here today to hear David Grossman and David Ulin chat about Grossman's work and his new novel, More Than I Love My Life. I love this book. David Grossman is simply one of my favorite writers of our time. Depending on his mood, he can write a warm, loving, and completely hilarious tribute to teenagers and their elders, such as in The Zigzag Kid, one of the best novels ever. And then he can write a most magnificent elegy to the end of the land, to soldiers and their families while in combat. His books can be at once personally searing to the reader while expressing universal truths, getting to the heart and soul of who someone really is, such as in the Booker Prize-winning novel, A Horse Walks into a Bar. When I think of David Grossman's literature, it's that of the past informing every cell of our being, of the weight of history, whether it's our own or our communities, having more impact than we can imagine. In his new novel, A Family Saga, More Than I Love My Life, three women of three generations go on a pilgrimage of sorts to the past to try to heal their relationships. History does repeat itself on intimate and larger scales. This novel is mesmerizing, so beautiful, heart-piercing, and filled with hope for the future. As in any David Grossman story, the hairpin curves and swerves can offer momentary relief or not. And as in any David Grossman story, don't expect it to leave your consciousness for a long time. Go to our website, either writersblockpresents.com or skirball.org, and find the link to Chevalier's books to get your copies. David has signed a limited number of book plates. David Ulin is an editor, an anthologist, and an author. His many books, such as The Lost Art of Reading, Sidewalking, and The Myth of Solid Ground, as well as its anthologies of Los Angeles literature, are markers for me that help to define life in this most dynamic city of Los Angeles. You'll have questions, and you can send us those via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. It's my great pleasure to introduce David Grossman and David Ulin.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Isabel. Thanks to Writer's Block and the Skirball, and thanks to all of you for being here. And thank you primarily to David Grossman, who I'm very honored to be on this virtual stage with today to discuss More Than I Love My Life and some other things. Just a quick, what we're going to do is we will talk probably till about 12:45 or thereabouts, and then we will open it up to questions. You can put those questions in the Q&A, and we will, and I'll ask them once we shift over to that part of the program. We're going to also do a very brief reading in a few minutes, but we want to start with a couple of questions, and that reading will be both in English. I'll do the English reading, and David will read in Hebrew from the very beginning of the novel. But I want to start with a couple of general questions, David. I wonder if we can talk a little bit about the inspiration and the genesis of this book. It's somewhat different than the genesis of your other novels, in the sense that it is based fairly closely, but also takes imaginative liberties with a story of an actual family of Eva Punich Nahir, who was a Hungarian partisan, and then I mean, I'll let you start with it, but I'm curious if you can just sort of set us up a little bit in terms of the kind of origin story of this novel, and how you came upon it and how you decided to write it as fiction.
First, good evening. It's evening here. Andrea, Isabel, David, good to see you. Good to be again in Skirball. The story originated when a woman called me some years ago, and she had some remarks regarding an article I wrote in Haaretz paper. And I was caught by her special accent. It was a mixture of Serbian, Croatian, Hungarian, and Hebrew. And I asked her about her origins, and she started to tell me the most fascinating story about her childhood in the city of Čakovec. She was a daughter to a well-to-do Jewish family. And at a certain point of the story, she stopped and she said, "But what do I do? What am I doing, burdening you with my boring story?" And at the same breath, she said, "May I call you later in the future sometime to continue the story?" And I said, "Yes, please do." And sure, she did. And I happily heard the continuity of the story. And then again, she stopped at the most pivotal moment and said, "May I call you sometime in the future?" And I already realized her method, the Scheherazade method, to cut in the most suspenseful place. And we started to talk. And she started to tell me her story, which was a tough, extreme story. And she told it in her unique way. She was really a unique human being. And even every human being is unique. Eva Punich Nahir was unique in a uniquer way. And we got close, and we argued a lot. And I started to write her down, to write her stories. And she started to ask, "Am I going to write a book about her?" And I said, "Yes, maybe. I cannot promise, because usually I don't know if I will write something. It has to burst from me, or really to take me sometimes against my will. It should be inevitable." That's I think, the way to describe it. When I'll feel it's inevitable, then I will write you. But I told Eva Punich Nahir, "One thing you have to know, I will not document you one-to-one. I'm not a documentarist. I will fantasize you, and I will imagine you. But I will never impose on you things that do not coincide with your personality and your nature. I'll be loyal to something, to the innermost part of you, but I might betray you in the exterior." And she accepted it. And I wrote this story, unfortunately, only after she died, because there were other books that I had to write them. It was The Horse Walks into a Bar and Falling Out of Time. And you were right, David, about the difficulty or the complexity of writing about a real human being, a flesh and blood, a concrete person. How do you do it? You all the time betray this person, because maybe, when we stand in front of the mirror in the morning, we look at a slight angle so it will flatter us. But if a writer writes about a person, a man or a woman, well, not necessarily this will be a flirting book, but she was a person that I'm sure, had she read it, she wouldn't like any attempt of me to beautify her. She will become very suspicious at me. She had a very poignant look at herself, at her weaknesses, at her greatness. She knew it all. And I learned from her, and I wrote, I hope I wrote in her spirit.
Did it ever occur to you, or as you were thinking about the book, I love this idea of the book has to be inevitable. I completely agree with that. I feel like I always tell students that if there's a way for you not to write it, don't write it, because it's not burning enough for you to have to sit down and do it. But I'm wondering, did you know all along, if you were going to write the book, that you would do it as fiction? I mean, you are also have written a lot of accomplished journalism. Did it ever occur to you to possibly write it as a kind of nonfiction portrait or non-fictional portrait of her? I'm very curious about the decision to write it as a novel.
There were some weeks, I think, in the beginning of the writing that I was tempted to explore this option, to write a documentary. But I so much love writing fiction, and writing fiction allows me to bring in new characters and new ways of talking, of thinking, new sense of humor. And the energy of inventing something is so strong in me. While when you document the world is already there. So of course it is there, but when we write about the world, the words that we choose, the nuances, the shades, recreate it. It's never only an act of documentation. There is always a dimension of creativity in it. But when you allow yourself to write a whole thing that is totally fiction, then the situation is different. The relationship between me and the book is different. I write the book, but in a way the book writes me. The book suggests all kind of dimensions in me that I was not aware of. And all in all, the totality of inventing a whole new world is something that I don't know such a pleasure from any other part in life, because when we invent a story, even if it exists, but we reinvent it, recreate it, we are so totally responsible for everything that happens there. I think we don't know the feeling of such totality from any other part of our life. And when we write, then the whole world is on us to conclude. And as I said, there is such sweetness in creating a whole new world that will act in a natural, harmonious way, even without our intervention. This magical moment when after a year or 2 or 5 of writing, that you can step back from the book that you are writing and you see how it works alone, how it works because of its energy, because of its inner validity, because of inner rhythm, that there is a melody that is special to this book, you know, because you are a writer too, and you know that every book has a melody of its own. And suddenly you step back and you see and you hear, and here it is, a book in the world, and now you send it to other people, and you just hope that they will treat him well, that they will love him for the right reasons and hate him for the right reasons, and not the other way around.
Yeah, it's an organic thing. It's not just the process that's organic, but the book itself as an artifact, I suppose. It's an organic thing. It takes, as you're writing, over the course of however many years it takes to write the book, all of the life that you're living, all of the things that you're seeing and experiencing kind of have a way of working their way into the story. Is that your experience of it?
Definitely. If in the beginning, I do not necessarily understand, why do I have to write this story? Why this story sticks to me? Why doesn't it go to other writers? And then slowly, if I'm loyal to this story, I understand how much it is relevant to me, to my life, and how much it is mine. Yeah.
So I want to ask one more question, and then we'll do the reading, and then we'll come back and talk in more detail. But the only other thing I want to just address at the top is, in this story too, because it's not just Eva's story, but her daughter, who is also the basis for a character in the novel, and who you talked to and had to sort of live with the idea that this book was being created. You said that, you know, Eva was dead by the time the book was written, but was there any kind of anxiety or potential, I don't know how to put it exactly, was there any concern about how her daughter, Tiana, would respond, or was she on board equally the whole time as her mother was?
Not equally, but I met her, we spent some days and I wrote her version of the story of her life. And I told her my line of story. Parts of it she accepted, parts she didn't accept, but as she said, I'm an artist and I was given the license to write as I want. And when she read the book, I will not tell her reactions because it's her privacy, but I can tell you I was very happy. And I didn't feel that I mistreated, not her mother, not herself, and not the story.
No, I agree. I mean, I think these characters are so rich and complicated, and there are ways in which I understand their behavior. I don't agree with every decision that they make. There are times where their decisions make me angry. There are times that their choices are just are tragic, and I think that the fact that they're not easy to box up and pin down makes them fully realized and three-dimensional, as I suspect the women are in life.
Yes, you said it. I mean, definitely.
So we're going to read the opening couple of pages of the book. I'm going to start just because we thought it would be easier to read in English first, and then when I'm done, David will read the same pages in Hebrew. So this is how the book begins. Raphael was 15 years old when his mother died and put him out of her misery. Rain poured down on the mourners huddled under umbrellas in the small kibbutz cemetery. Tuvia, Raphael's father, sobbed bitterly. He had cared for his wife devotedly for years and now looked lost and bereft. Raphael, wearing shorts, stood apart from the others and pulled the hood of his sweatshirt over his eyes so that no one would know he wasn't crying. He thought, now that she's dead, she can see all the things I thought of her. That was the winter of 1962. A year later, his mother met Vera Novak, who had come to Israel from Yugoslavia, and they became a couple. Vera had arrived with her only daughter, Nina, a tall, fair-haired girl of 17, whose long face, which was pale and very beautiful, showed almost no expression. The boys in Raphael's class called Nina Sphinx. They would sneak behind her and mimic her gait, the way she hugged her body and stared ahead vacantly. When she once caught two kids imitating her, she simply pummeled them bloody. They'd never seen such fighting on the kibbutz. It was hard to believe how much ferocious strength she had in her thin arms and legs. Rumors started flying. They said that while her mother was a political prisoner in the gulag, little Nina had lived on the streets. The streets, they said with a meaningful look. They said that in Belgrade, she joined a gang of feral kids who kidnapped children for ransom. That's what they said. People say things. The fight, as well as other incidents and rumors, failed to pierce the fog in which Raphael lived after his mother's death. For months, he was in a self-induced coma. Twice a day, morning and evening, he took a powerful sleeping pill from his mother's medicine cabinet. He didn't even notice Nina when he occasionally ran into her around the kibbutz. But one evening, about 6 months after his mother died, he was taking a shortcut through the avocado orchard to the gymnasium when Nina came toward him. She walked with her head bowed, hugging herself as if everything around her was cold. Raphael stopped, tensing up for the reasons he did not understand. Nina was in her own world and did not notice him. He saw the way she moved. That was his first impression, her quiet, sparing motion, the limpid high forehead and a thin blue dress that fluttered halfway down her shins. The expression on his face when he recounted. Only when they got closer did Raphael see that she was crying. Quiet, muffled sobs, and then she noticed him and stopped and curved inward. Their gazes entangled fleetingly, and one might sorrowfully add inextricably. The sky, the earth, the trees, Raphael told me. I don't know. I felt like nature had passed out. Nina was the first to recover. She gave an angry puff and hurried away. He had time to glimpse her face, which had instantly shed all expression, and something inside him coursed toward her. He held out his hand after her. I can actually see him standing there with his hand out. And that is how he's remained, with the outstretched hand, for 45 years.
So I'll read the Hebrew. Thank you for reading.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
I think we should mention Jessica Cohen, my wonderful translator, who made this possible. רפאל היה בן 15 כשמתה אימא שלו וגאלה אותו מייסוריה. גשם ירד על חברי הקיבוץ שהצטופפו תחת מטריות בבית הקברות הקטן. טוביה, אביו של רפאל, מרר בבכי. שנים טיפל באשתו במסירות, ועכשיו נראה אבוד ומיותם. רפאל, במכנסיים קצרים, עמד נבדל מהאחרים, כיסה את ראשו ואת עיניו בקפוצ'ון, שלא יראו שהוא לא בוכה. הוא חשב, עכשיו שהיא מתה, היא יכולה לראות את כל הדברים שחשבתי עליה. זה היה בחורף 1962. אחרי שנה פגש אבא שלו את ורה נובק שבאה לארץ מיוגוסלביה, והם התחילו לחיות כמו זוג. ורה הגיעה לישראל עם בתה היחידה, נינה, נערה בת 17, גבוהה ובהירת שיער, שבפנים הארוכות שלה, שהיו חברות ויפות מאוד, כמעט לא הייתה הבאה. נערים בכיתה של רפאל קראו לנינה ספינקס, היו מתגנבים מאחוריה ומחקים אותה בהליכתה, מחבקת את גופה בזרועותיה ובוהה במבט חלול. הייתה פעם שהיא תפסה שני חבר'ה שחיכו אותה, ופשוט פוצצה להם את הפרצוף. מכות כאלה עוד לא ראו בקיבוץ. היה קשה להאמין כמה כוח ופראות היו לה בזרועות וברגליים הדקות שלה. התחילו לרוץ שמועות. סיפרו שבזמן שאימא שלה הייתה אסירה פוליטית בגולאג, נזרקה נינה, שהייתה אז ילדה, לרחוב. אמרו לרחוב והוסיפו מבט רב משמעות. סיפרו שהצטרפה בבלגרד לכנופיה של ילדי פרא שחטפה ילדים כדי לקבל כופר. סיפרו, אנשים מדברים. הסיפור של המכות וגם עוד התרחשויות ושמועות לא הבקיעו את הערפל שרפאל חי בתוכו אחרי מות אמו. במשך חודשים הוא היה שקוע בהרדמה עצמית. פעמיים ביום, בבוקר ובערב, היה בולע כדור שינה חזק שלקח מארון התרופות של אמו. הוא אפילו לא הבחין בנינה כשנתקל בה פה ושם בקיבוץ. אבל ערב אחד, בערך חצי שנה אחרי מות אמו, הוא חתך דרך מטע אבוקדו אל אולם הספורט, ונינה באה מולו. היא הלכה בראש מורכן, וחיבקה את עצמה כאילו הכל סביבה קר. רפאל עצר, נדרך פתאום ולא הבין בגלל מה. נינה הייתה מכונסת בתוכה ולא הבחינה בו. הוא ראה את התנועה שלה, זה היה הרושם הראשון, התנועה השקטה, החסכונית. מצח גבוה, צח, סמלה כחולה פשוטה בדקה, שרפרפה על מחצית שוקע. הבאה על פניו שסיפר. רק כשהייתה קרובה אליו ראה רפאל שהיא בוכה בשקט, בכי חנוק, ואז גם היא הבחינה בו ועצרה והתקמרה. המבטים שלהם הסתבכו זה בזה למשך כמה שניות, אפשר לומר בצער עד לבלי התר. השמיים, האדמה, העצים, אמר לי רפאל, לא יודע, הרגשתי כאילו הטבע התעלף. נינה התעשתה ראשונה, היא פלטה נשיפה נזעמת והתרחקה במהירות. הוא עוד הספיק להעיף מבט בפנים שלה שבין רגע התקלפו שוב מכל הבאה, ומה שהוא גאה בו אליה, הוא הושיט יד אחריה, אני ממש יכולה לראות אותו, עומד שם עם היד, וככה הוא גם נשאר עם היד שלוחה, 45 שנה.
Thank you. It was beautiful to hear it in the original. I really appreciate that. So I want to ask you, one of the things that's really interesting about that passage to me is the way that it kind of sneakily introduces the first person narrator. The book starts out almost as if it's a third person narration, and then we get in those little subtle references, Raphael, that he told me. And then that expands as we read the book. And I don't want to spoil anything for people in the audience who haven't read it, but that expands as we read the book, and the book becomes a kind of chorus of all of these voices. There's so many stories being told and overlapping stories and double versions of stories and things like that. I'm curious about that as a narrative strategy, the idea of kind of introducing the first person narrator a little bit late on the second page and very subtly rather than right at the outset, and how that sets the table for all of these voices that are in conversation throughout the novel.
Most of it is not intended. It just happens because it should be like that. That's the feeling, that it should be written like that. I like to start the story from some distance. And only then slowly we suddenly understand that there is a storyteller, that it's not a neutral text, that somebody is giving us this text, and maybe this somebody has an interest of his or her own. And gradually we learn to know this voice, but then there is another one who will tell, or the storyteller suddenly splits itself into some other points of view. Sometimes it's good to have it, because when the story has harsh contents, I feel it's good to separate it between different characters in the book and to show how they create this story and how they combine the information to one possible optional possibility.
Is it, I mean, it's a strategy that you've used in other, I think, it reminds me, for instance, of the sort of the talking, the endless kind of talking in To the End of the Land, and the sort of notion of a character who sort of becomes the storyteller. I mean, here we have long passages where Vera, who's the character based on Eva, is speaking and telling her history. We have long passages where Nina is talking. We certainly have the narrator herself, the narrator of Really, the daughter of Nina as well. I'm curious about sort of how you see, I see some relationships between those two novels. I also see some interesting connections between this novel and See Under Love, but I want to talk a little bit about that.
I would like to hear that. What are the similarities?
Well, I think what I will say is, in terms of See Under Love, I think, you're taking on and kind of retelling the Bruno Schultz story, which is a story from life, and in a way kind of redeeming Schultz's life in a certain sense. It feels not dissimilar to what you're doing for, I'm just going to call her Vera because that's the character in the novel. It feels not dissimilar to what's happening with Vera through all of this. And these tellings, we're getting at something deeper about the character than maybe that character knew about herself. I don't know if you've thought about that, or if that seems.
No, it's a good interpretation. I tell you, David, I like to tell stories about people who tell stories. Mm-hmm. And in the storytelling, something new is being revealed, especially if you have a good listener. Because usually we all know it. We over the years we develop a kind of a personal official story, our formal official story that we handle to new acquaintances, people that we want to impress, people that we want to gain their mercy sometimes, or their love sometimes, or their attraction. And we know how to tell it, and we perfect it more and more, and we polish it more and more over the years until it's really crystallized. You don't have to change anything, and we tell it again and again and again. But maybe at a certain point we shall look back at our official legislative story, and we understand that this story became like a prison for us, like a trap. We are trapped in this story about our life, about our youth, about our childhood, about the insult that our parents have insulted us. And we do not really understand how it limits and suffocates us by now, because maybe we are in a totally different situation than we were when we created this formal story. Maybe we have more room to maneuver within ourselves. Maybe we are not so totally dependent on what our parents or our friends think of us. Maybe we can liberate ourselves from all these historic insults that were true or not true, and they created us. Maybe we might get to a point that it's about time not to be the victims of our official story. And then, for example, we might understand that when we tell about our parents, maybe we can understand that also Mama had a mama, or also Papa has the right for psychology, that he's also very complicated, multi-layered human being, but we never allowed ourselves to look at him truly. And of course, I'm speaking about individuals, but it applies also to nations and to states, because every nation needs some official legislative stories at the beginning, the mythological story about how we were the best and the most courageous, and how our enemies were horrible and devil. But maybe after some decades that we fed on these myths, it's about time to start to see where they are limiting us, where they prevent us from really seeing our partner, our enemy sometimes, and ourselves. And by the way, the enemy is the one who sees in us the things that we prefer not to know about ourselves, because those bad qualities are directed at the enemy. And we want to believe that when the war is over, we shall pull back and we shall withdraw from this bad situation or immoral situation and become again our good, clean, pure country or pure society. but it is the enemy who noticed first that maybe we've gone too far. Maybe the pollution has infiltrated into our inner organ and we shall not be able to return to what we hope to return. So it is essential, I think, for countries and for peoples and for nations to re-examine their official stories. Maybe they are in a situation now that they can allow the justice of the enemy to infiltrate into our inner organs. The misery, the real suffering of our enemy. It will not cause us any damage. It will just make our contact with reality more tight and more realistic and more free. There is much more ability to be free when we allow ourselves to tell the old story anew.
Well, there's so much interesting here. I always, this reminds me of in the book a couple of times, both Rafi and Gilles talk about how sometimes when you're interviewing someone on camera, there's a moment where they start to really tell the truth, right? Where they kind of peel back the surface of exactly that sort of curated story you're telling, and they surprise themselves. And I think that that's definitely something that's happening here. It also reminds me, and I hadn't been intending to bring this up, but it reminds me of the effect of, say, The Yellow Wind when it came out, and in fact, revealed a narrative that most Israelis either didn't know or didn't want to know about the sort of the depth of the rage, of Palestinian rage, that changed in many ways. It changed the narrative, or changed the way of thinking about the narrative. Of course, then ensuing events helped further that along. I'm really curious about that moment, the idea of a storyteller telling a story that they're not entirely aware of what's underneath it, and then coming to that moment of realization. Is that one of the effects for you in terms of having characters talk at such length about themselves? Is like that you, as you're creating that language, as you're creating those stories, you as the writer end up discovering or being surprised by the character as well?
Yeah, this is the wonderful moments of writing, that the character betrays me, that it takes me to places that I'm not totally free, that I will have all kind of considerations and interests. But actually, if you think about it, this character does not betray me, but is loyal to me more than I dare to be loyal to myself. And so many things I've discovered about myself and about people near to me that I was unable to discover without writing. And of course, I think of how easily we are tempted to stereotype other people or other peoples. And when I write about them, suddenly there is this joy of, there is in the Gemara, in the Talmud, there is this proverb, Ein simcha ke'atarat hasafek. There is no joy like the untie of the doubt, because if you untie a doubt, suddenly there is a relief. But I say there is no joy like the undoing or untying of a stereotype, because suddenly a person that you trapped or imprisoned in the stereotype, suddenly it bereft itself and nuances itself. And suddenly you see a whole human being with all the layers, with all the inner contradiction of human being. And you can really enjoy almost physically the wealth of options, the wealth of roads that are open to you in a place that you felt blocked beforehand. This was one of the major the major feeling for me when I wrote The Yellow Wind, going into the place that usually Israelis never went to go into the occupied territories and to be exposed to everything that happens there, to be exposed to the Israeli brutality and cruelty sometimes, to be exposed to the misery that we cause them and they cause us, they is the Palestinians, and to understand that until now I spoke in false words when I tried to describe this reality, because I spoke in the language that were provided for me by the authorities, the government, the courts, the media, my own fears. All of them created the whole dictionary. Now, I will make it more complicated. At that time, when I wrote The Yellow Wind, I was the anchorman of the main news magazine in Israel. I was the guy who used to awaken the Israelis every day at 6, 7 o'clock. hammering on their heads, wake up, guys, we have wonderful bad news for you. I sometimes thought that what we had for one morning was enough for Holland or Denmark for a century. And in a way, when I worked in the radio, there was a special dictionary of words that you were not allowed to say, like occupation, it was forbidden, or there was very special cunning technique of describing things that were uneasy for us, like during disturbances, a local youngster had been killed. Now, every word in this sentence is a lie, because disturbances, as if there is a kind of an order in an occupied people. A youngster, he could have been 3 years old, local, never said Palestinian. They never had names until a group of 4 people started to campaign that the people that we kill will have names. And above all, the passive form has been killed. Nobody, God forbid, took a gun and killed him. So suddenly I went to a place that was much more complicated than the dictionary that I had. And I had to recreate my dictionary. I had to find words to describe reality that was undescribable for me. And I always feel that the writer is someone who feels claustrophobic in words of other people, really suffocating claustrophobia. And when I went to the occupied territories, this is what I felt. I felt suffocated, almost physically, because there were not words to describe what I see and what I felt, and the depth of the tragedy of both peoples, not only of us, but not only the Palestinians, but the mixture creates such a tragedy that until now, 40 years after I went there, it's so hard to find or to think of a way to get out of this insoluble situation.
I'm curious, I mean, I don't know quite how to put this question, but this raises a question for me about sort of what it means, and I think obviously you can only speak for yourself, but what it means to be an Israeli writer. I was going to say an Israeli novelist, but we are talking about The Yellow Wind a little bit. But in terms of, I don't know how to, I hesitate to put responsibility on any artist, but in terms of your own sort of thinking about the role of the writer, the role of the writer in Israel, the role of an Israeli writer who's concerned, as you say, with this kind of clarity of language, or trying to see beneath the sort of passive constructions that are designed to keep us at a distance from what's happening. I'm just curious your thoughts on sort of I guess the moral responsibility of the artist in society.
I think that the moral obligation that a writer has is to write a good story. This is the most important thing. All the rest are circumstances. But since I was born in Israel, and since I take the reality here very seriously and very personally, and I feel that not only the language is being polluted, but the air is polluted by the idea that we are occupying and oppressing another people for 54 years. It's unthinkable that we, quite a moral nation with moral aspirations, that we got used to a situation that is so distorted, so unbelievable. And we function brilliantly in this distorted situation. And I try to understand how is it possible. So I write political essays, I write speeches, sometimes I wrote books about the situation, only because I felt that this situation places a kind of a question in front of me and urges me to answer, what am I doing? What is my part in this society? Am I doing enough? I must say that always in the beginning of writing of a fiction book, there is the feeling of remorse and regret and feeling that maybe I'm doing wrong by investing the next 2, 3, 4 years in a fiction story rather than go and write again about the occupation. But somehow I feel I said quite clearly what I thought about this situation. And I'm really much more myself when I write fiction. That's what I feel. And then when I write fiction, I feel bad feelings that I'm not writing about the situation. So it's a constant unease, I must say. But again, David, the best thing for me, the place where I'm at my place is when I write fiction, when I imagine, when I have this freedom. Maybe it has to do with the situation, you know, maybe because I live in a reality that is, after all, suffocating when you allow yourself to understand what happens. Maybe I do need to write fiction and to allow me to breathe with both lungs, because this is, as I said more than once this evening, this is the quality of writing fiction, the ability to be free. It's a kind like the imagination is like a metaphoric organ that man has invented. And when you allow yourself to yield to imagination, really it's endless. It's not the infinity of physics and not of mathematics, but the infinity of human being. And we are endless, so endless. And there's such a pleasure in discovering it through art, through writing.
There's something so interesting about the way that history works in your fiction as a kind of part of the physical landscape. I think about I think about Aura and the walking through the country into the end of the land. I think about this journey that the family that Vera and Nina take back to Goli Otok, which is the Adriatic Alcatraz, as it was known, which was one of Tito's gulags or concentration camps, work camps for dissidents. And it seems to me that in certainly in the new book, and I think in many books, that the kind of reconciliation, or the reconciliation between characters, the emotional reconciliation, grows in part out of a reconciliation with history and geography. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about your thoughts about that.
I wrote several books. Well, first of all, most of my books took place in Israel, because this is reality I know and I feel at home, even when I do not feel at home. And I wish it will be a home. But actually, even now when I wrote about Goli Otok, about the regime of Tito, about dictatorship, I feel that the mechanisms of arbitrariness are the same in different countries, in different histories, in different stories. But the evil and the brutality that regimes can provide are almost always the same. And they have a power of mobilizing the victims into their power. And I'm just fascinated by this image of one individual who is facing the arbitrariness of a regime, the arbitrariness of history, the arbitrariness of huge migration process, to see what happens to the individual when he's trapped in this situation. Is there a way to keep yourself while you are there, while you are swept by history? I remember when I was writing Sea and the Love, I had two questions that I asked myself. Had I been there as a Jew, how would I have reacted? And had I been there as one of the Nazis, how would I have reacted? How a normal human being becomes a Nazi, becomes a monster even. What do you have to erase in yourself in order to be able to erase others, and huge magnitude of numbers of people? And also I wanted to know, had I been as a Jew, has I been during this time, the time of the Shoah, how would I have maintained my individuality, my idiosyncrasy in a reality that was all intended in order to erase uniqueness and idiosyncrasy? People did not have names. They were reduced to the lower level of flesh and blood, numbers tattooed on their arms. People had no friends, no secrets, no intimacy, no talents. What did I have to place in front of such obliteration of myself as a human being? What do I have to keep me alive as a human being? Now I know the answer. I know the answer because for me it is writing. The thing I hope that, I don't know if I would have had the power or the energy to write in such horrible situations, but I think of someone that I really look up to, Primo Levi, who was able to do things like that. And I also, since I spoke about art, I just want to say one more thing about it. I wrote a book called Falling Out of Time. And this is about a death of a precious person. And this for me was facing the ultimate arbitrariness, the arbitrariness of death. And I saw how religious people react to a great loss and how their belief helped them. I am a non-believer. I'm a secular, out and out secularist. But I think that this book taught me something, that the only thing that can make me feel at the same time in front of such terrible arbitrariness, to feel at the same time the nothingness of death, the abyssness of death and the darkness of death, but at the same time to feel the wealth of life, the multi-layered of being, the richness of life. The only thing that can give me the two things, the two feelings simultaneously at the same time is art, is prose and poetry and music, of course, and cinema and theater. This is the only thing that allows me to be together at the same, at the two dimensions, and to be immersed totally in them. And I think the best books that I have read in my life were written in such climate, in such atmosphere of the two roads and the moment they merge.
Yeah, I think that makes so much sense to me. We have about 10 or so minutes left, so I want to go to some questions from people in the audience, and some of this connects to what we're just talking about. Well, here's one person asks, the cruelty of the 20th century seeps into all of your novels. Do you ever feel a need to walk away from the past, or do you need that truth of history to make writing a story inevitable, as the inevitability you were referring to at the beginning?
Well, I think that in my children books, and I wrote something, I think 19 or 20 children books, there is a feeling of comfort and solace and hope. But it's harder when you write about grown-ups. It's harder when you understand what is the cost, of living in the 20th and 21st century. When you see how evil spreads almost easily, and how difficult it is for people to give up on cynicism, for example. But I also, I'm very harsh with myself, but I must say that also in books that talk about harsh realities, because I try to portray my characters as human beings, they also have humor, and they have irony, and of course they have passion. And I love these places when suddenly the surface of the arbitrary, tough reality is broken, and suddenly there is a flow of love, of sexuality, of sensuality, of passion, like in this book, by the way.
Here's another question from someone in the audience. Vera's story is so powerful and painful. Were you ever tempted to give the book a different ending, one that sort of mitigated some of? I guess it does have a kind of, I don't know if I'd call it an optimistic ending but this person, different ending, a less optimistic ending, let's say a less conciliatory or reconciling ending.
Well, first, when I'm writing a book, I never know what the end will be until I am very close to the end of it. Because I feel that if I know the end, I will be more subjugated to this end, towards this purpose. And therefore, I allow myself to know the end only when I'm very, very close, especially with such a book, with More Than I Love My Life, that has the option of many endings. And I like it. I like that the book radiates different options, different scenarios, and that even after we have read it and read the ending of it, still the other options continue to flicker in our minds, in our heart.
Do you think that we're in a time when only fiction, and this comes back to this question of fiction and nonfiction or fiction and journalism, do you think that we're living in a moment where fiction is really the only tool that allows us to kind of really fully address the world we're living in and all of its complications and its questions, whether because of the empathy that gets generated from being able to enter into characters' lives or for other reasons that kind of...
No, actually not. I would like to think that fiction is the storyteller of our time, but it's not only that. First of all, for example, when we look of an experience like the Shoah, I thought that we need to have two ways to talk about the Shoah. One is the scientific. We have to know all the facts and all the figures and the processes. We have to allow the scientists to get to the heart of the matter as much as possible. But at the same time, we need art to tell us the things that science cannot tell us, because art can involve us in a way that no other measure can do. And with art, we can suddenly feel how we had been acted had we been there. We have no escape from feeling what these people have felt. But the question is wider than that, and I think that it indicates to the fact that today the mechanism that tells the story, the everyday story of our life, is the media. And the media is tricky, the mass media. The mass media is a term that was coined by sociologists in the 30s of the previous century. And it's tricky because we think that it's a media that is tuned to the masses, but actually it is media that turns normal human beings into masses and sometimes into mob. And we have to be very suspicious towards this media. And we have to, even to teach at school from very young age, teach children how to relate to the media and to know how to read a paper, to analyze the manipulation that is being done on them. So especially in a world that is so dominated by the storytelling of the media, fiction is needed, because fiction can give another way, a more, maybe more deep, not always, but sometimes deep way, and with some demands for morality, which the media rarely has. It has it in certain parts of it, in certain corners. But usually what really interests the media is the constant exchanging of the people who are being on fire, so to say. While the fiction makes you understand other human beings in a much deeper way. You allow yourself to be invaded by people whom you don't know, and you are able to be yourself, but you consist of many other people. This is, I think, what we feel. And also, you know, when tens of millions of people are watching the mass media, watching something on television, they become the same. They are glued together. While when you read a book, even if 100 people are reading the same book, each one of them reads the book differently, or may I say the book reads them differently.
And I think also the book comes to life. I mean, I've always thought about reading as a kind of as a conversation or almost a performance of a score in a certain sense. And so the reader becomes to me as important in animating the narrative of a book as the writer is. There's no novel without a reader, just as there's no novel without a writer.
Yeah. What can I say? All right.
There's a couple of other questions here. One is, I know from that you have been involved in sort of writers' exchanges with Palestinian writers over the years. One of the audience members asks, is there a Palestinian David Grossman trying to deal with the situation? And if so, who is it, and is their work available in English translation?
Well, I can think of, first of all, of Elias Khoury, who is a Lebanese but with Palestinian origins, and he writes in the most moving way that I have read about the conflicts, also about us, the Israelis, and he writes in a totally non-stereotypical way. He's open, he's sensitive, he's nuanced, and he is a wonderful storyteller.
And as long as we're on the subject of translation, someone says, I would love to have a second interview with the translator, Jessica Cohen, and then asks, by the way, there's a new movement to have the translator's name on the cover. I wonder if David Grossman's publisher has considered doing this. But I don't know if you know the answer to that question, but I definitely am curious about, your sense. We read from the book, both in the original and in a translated version. And I'm curious about your thoughts on being translated and translation as another kind of part of that conversation. It seems to me that, as we read the English language of this book, we're reading your book, but we're also reading Jessica's version of your book in a certain sense. And I wonder if you can, and I'm sorry, Andrea Grossman's asking if you can repeat the name of the Lebanese author that you mentioned.
Elias Khoury.
Yeah, Khoury, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm curious about your sense of that of the book, the translation, I guess the sort of the metaphysics of translation, let's say.
It is metaphysical, and it's such a mystery. How does it work? Because, I write a sentence that echoes the Bible, for example. It's very natural for an Israeli writer. The Bible is very present in our everyday life. So, and Jessica translated to English, but what meaning does it have in English, and how can she catch together both the Bible intuitions of my sentence and the English one, and how she fits it into the right era in history? It's so complicated. So I did something unusual. In the last 3 novels, I gathered my translators, many of them, into a place, twice into a place that's called Strahlen. It's a little German city or town on the Dutch border. And in the last book, I gathered them in a little town called Sisak in Croatia. And we worked together for 7 days. I read them the whole story from A to Z in Hebrew. They all speak Hebrew. They're all translators. We made them sit one next to the other in terms of sister languages. The Romanian near the Slovakia, near the Czech, the Dutch near the German, the Norwegian near the Swedish. And I would read a paragraph, and then I would pause. And then they started to whisper, to consult among themselves, which is the best solution for this or that word, or this or that expression or idiom. And it was really great. For 1 week, we did only spiritual thing without any real foreseeable interest, just for the sake of precision. And there is such a pleasure in doing something precise and delicate in a thick world. You feel more pure after that. And of course, you see the dynamic between the different personalities of the translators, but also the personalities of the language. There were some times that some translators thought that a phrase is too emotional, it's almost kitsch, and immediately the Italian and the Catalan and the Spanish jumped on this translator and said, no, it's not kitsch, it's just exact emotion that we want to have it, just the exact temperature. Or for example, when I realized that in certain languages, there are 3 words for the situation of the fetus during the time of the pregnancy. In Hebrew, you have only 1 word, ubar. From fertilization till birth, it's ubar. But in some other languages, it's 3 different names. So all this game and even flirting of the languages with each other, it was wonderful. And I intend to do it with every new book of mine.
I love this idea because it really does make that individual act of writing, or it brings active collaboration into the act of presenting the book in other languages. I think that's amazing. We're out of time. I really thank you so much for this conversation, David. It's been a real delight to talk with you today. And
thank you. The same for me, David. Thank you for your question. Thank you for the conversation we had.
I thank you for the conversation as well. And I'm going to bring Isabel back in to sort of take us out.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you, David. What a meaningful conversation. Thank you again to all of you out there in the audience for spending part of your Sunday with us. and especially to our panelists. A special thanks to Writer's Block for your collaboration. Everyone, please have a look at our website at skirball.org to check out all of our offerings, both live and as well as virtual. We are indeed open again and welcoming visitors to campus, so we hope to see you all again soon. And please don't forget to buy your copy of the book. Thank you again, everybody, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Good night. For me, it's good night. Bye. Ciao, ciao.
Good night. Thank you.
Right.